Mia Love and Black Republicans make history.
Out there said that Utah would never elect a Black Republican LDS woman to Congress. Not only did we do it, we were the first to do it.
I'm not sure I now trust Republicans, but Tim Scott is correct.
When the Congress was controlled by the Democrats for 40 consecutive years, if we look at the result of that control, what has happened in Black America?
Some sobering reality from all people, Bill O'Reilly.
The white Republican power structure is afraid of Black America.
But the overwhelming silence is deafening.
So to everyone who voted, I want you to know that I hear you. To the 2/3 of voters who chose not to participate in the process yesterday, I hear you too.
I'm Anthony Harris.
I'm Cleo Monago.
And you're listening to the Parallel Realities Podcast. Much to talk about on this, the very first edition of the Parallel Realities Podcast. But before we get into all that, Cleo, can you just explain to the listeners the rationale for this podcast?
Parallel reality is important because what the name is symbolized of, or symbolic of, I should say, is that in traditional or so-called mainstream media, there's lots of information and a reality in a perspective that never makes a mainstream, yet that perspective is just as real as what they show in the mainstream, frankly, which is not always real. So parallel reality is going to address issues that are important, particularly to people of African descent, but probably other Americans as well, that are topical and relevant and usually political or socially important, that won't make the mainstream, but that we see as just as important as whatever they're showing on mainstream media.
Okay, so with that said, one of the main topics this past week, the very first Tuesday in November for 2014, marked the midterm elections. Much to talk about there, as many viewed that as some sort of a referendum on the last 2 years of the Obama administration. And as many had predicted, the Republicans took control of the House, and now they have a majority. Mia Love in Utah became the first Black Republican to win there, and Tim Scott in South Carolina also won, and these are Black Republicans. Some may view that as an oxymoron, but when you consider that the Democratic Party hasn't really lived up to what some Black people think they should, do you consider that some sort of an oxymoron?
No, I don't. I don't see a big difference in terms of helping Black people, between the Democratic Party and the Republican parties. I think there's well-meaning people, frankly, such as Maxine Waters, who's involved in the Democratic Party machine by association and by membership. But when it comes to on-the-ground delivery nationally and in local communities, they haven't really delivered much. And the Republicans have never been expected to deliver. And I think that what's happening between Mia Love and Tim Scott is that people are not really seeing a big difference themselves. Also, I think a lot of people have just not voted, and by default, they won.
Yeah, in the soundbite we played in the tease there, President Obama referenced that 2/3 of the nation did not vote, and if you look at some of the figures across the country, I don't think there was a state that had a 50% majority of people that went to the polls. With that said, we want to deal specifically with Black people. How does that, the fact that we have a Black Republican in Utah and a Black Republican in South Carolina, and these are normally states where you would not expect to see that, winning, these are people who are winning, does that change the discourse in some way? And should Black people look at the Republican Party?
I think Black people should look at holding folks accountable. I mean, even though the Democrats have not delivered and Republicans have not been expected to deliver, we have not made them deliver. And Black people have always had to make people deliver to us in this country who are in positions of power, if you will, or decision making, and we have not. And I think that we make up a lot of that 2/3 that have not voted. It's part of a mindset that we have that's unfortunate, of being so powerless in terms of our perspective that we feel like there's nothing that we can do and that it's irrelevant. And we need to learn that it's relevant. So I'm not sure that Mia or Tim is going to make a big difference. I think they're going to wind up becoming part of a white machine, frankly, and they're just a black face. But regardless of whose face is in there, we need to start holding people accountable. And again, not only are we not voting, we're not active.
The Congressional Black Caucus loves the president too. We do too. We're supportive of the president, but we're getting tired, y'all. And so what we want to do is we want to give the president every opportunity to show what he can do and what he's prepared to lead on. But our people are hurting. The unemployment is unconscionable. We don't know what the strategy is. We don't know why on this trip that he's in the United States now, he's not in any black communities. We don't know that. When you let us know it is time to let go, we'll let go.
When you talk about accountability, there were some people, and I'm only using the Obama example because he is the preeminent black politician, or at this point, as the president of the United States. Many people held President Obama accountable. There were many people along the line. Tavis Smiley comes to mind, Cornel West, and some of the things they did. They held him accountable, but they were told by many black people to lay low. He's got to take care of this now. If you recall, back in 2008, not soon after he took office, we had the big economic collapse on Wall Street. And people said, oh, he needs to deal with that now. He can't address black issues. So, when you say accountability, that comes with a bit of contradiction or a bit of irony as well.
Well, the black community doesn't hold people accountable locally, civically, in terms of organizations like the NAACP, or hardly anybody. So we shouldn't expect us to hold the president, Obama, accountable. We're too busy admiring and being excited that he's there. And one of the reasons why we didn't want to hear critiques from the likes of Cornel or Tavis is because that disrupts the romantic symbolism that we want to celebrate of him being there. Unfortunately, we're too involved out of deprivation and not having had black presidents before. We're too involved in what I call deprivation sickness, being deprived, that we're not holding people accountable. And that's a real problem.
But the unfortunate thing with that is that they got drowned out in the process. So you get a feeling of my voice does not matter, what I say does not count. Let me go on back to dealing with my real issues. I need to either, one, get a job. I either number two, get more money to help my family. So those meat and potatoes issues for people became much more important than involving themselves in the process. And during the campaign, the very first campaign with Obama, election day actually, when he won, you remember a lot of black people went to the polls in droves to vote. But I interviewed a number of people for a small documentary that I did, and a lot of people said, let me back up. A number of people said, that I interviewed, said that I'm just doing this for the symbolism of it. Right. They did not believe in politics. So how do we begin to change that? Because if you listen, and we'll play these sound bites later, if you listen to Mia Love and Tim Scott, and you view their stories, especially Mia Love's, you get the sense that they are a bit much more attractive to some black people than the Black Democratic Party. My question is, how do we get people to not deal with their meat and potato, or to also deal with their meat and potatoes issues, and then hold people accountable? Because again, as I said, people get the sense that I'm expressing how I feel, and I'm only doing this out of symbolism. Right. But then I see when you get in office and you not addressing my issues, then this is same old, same old.
Well, see, what's same old though is black people, and there's a reason behind this. This is not a genetic disposition. This has to do with, in my opinion, racism and the weight of it on our psyche and its impact on our behavior, which can be very demoralizing. But the point I'm trying to make to you is that the meat and potato issues are connected to who is in these positions of power and decision making. We have to understand that. Just like when there's a crisis or a young man is killed or whatever, we wait until there's a body on a smartphone camera to react. We have to start being proactive like everybody else and make sure that people do what they need to do to help us get meat and potatoes. It's all connected. I mean, people call black communities market deserts or food deserts because there's no quality food coming from the markets. I raise that because that's an example of us tolerating a lack of quality throughout our lives because we don't feel valuable enough to take power. And voting is a way to not only try to take power, but to test whether you can actually have power. I was moved by the symbolic power of Michelle and the two girls and Obama, who has an African father. That was all very moving to me symbolically. But what also occurred, which keeps on occurring in our community, is that we watch things instead of being involved in things. And one of the things that demoralized black people early on in Obama's reign is his lack of speaking directly to the black community from the national stage. We hardly ever heard him in immediate ways about the relevance of his position to black people.
Well, why is that? I mean, he's not the first one. Why is that? Why is there a reluctance or fear of politicians to speak? Because you know, one of the things we always hear, we saw it here in New York with Mayor Dinkins back in the mid 80s, early 90s. One of the first things they said to him, "You're not the mayor of just black people, you're the mayor of all the people." And from time to time, we heard that with Obama as well. So the tone is kind of already set where the script is laid out as to how they're going to play. When I say they, I'm talking about these politicians.
Well, that's a very unfortunate and racism accommodating comment to say he's not just the president of black people, because we know that. Everybody knows that. When Deakins was the mayor of New York, we all know that. That's a deflecting, disorienting comment that's made, in my opinion, to accommodate whiteness, because we already know that. And nobody expected Obama, including myself, in my dream world, in terms of him making a difference. I never expected him to be the quote unquote just a black president. But we expected him to actually not be afraid, or hope that he was not going to be afraid to talk about black issues while being the president.
Right. So why is there that fear within these politicians to address black issues specifically, to come out and say, hey, I'm concerned? I mean, you know, you and I over the years have had conversations about some of the comments that, I mean, outright chastising comments that President Obama made about black men and fatherhood and things like that. How come he couldn't make a similar stance on police brutality or other issues?
Well, there's two questions there. One is, why does he comment on police brutality, et cetera? The other question you asked was, well, why do these black politicians step away from talking about blackness or addressing blackness? So that's two questions. I want to make sure that listeners are clear. When it comes to the issue of race, black people are inundated, scarred, and traumatized, and self-conscious. For example, Mia Love said race is not the issue. Yet the first thing she says in her acceptance speech was, we're the first blacks, and I'm the first black. So that's a contradiction. Either you're going to say race is irrelevant, or it's not, and it is relevant. And when we say it's not relevant, again, that's a white accommodating passage to get them to back off. So instead of just being black human beings who are using our positions to make up for history, along with doing our job for the whole country, we get codependent on white approval and white people not rejecting us, and that compromises our capacity to be helpful to black people. So you cannot be in that state and then respond to the murder of Michael Brown or racism or inequality, because then you become black again. And one of our concerns on the stage in this country is white folks and how they feel about us and whether they're going to support us or not. That becomes more important, unfortunately, than black people. Again, going back to Obama, when he dissed Reverend Wright, which he tried not to twice when he gave these eloquent speeches, he finally had to diss him and separate himself from this man whose church he went to, the man who married him. He did that for white folks. So instead of learning how to be strategic around dealing with racism and white people and giving them what they need and giving all of America what it needs, and also doing things to make up for imbalances toward black people, we wind up throwing everything toward whiteness, and black people lose, no matter what color the candidate is, and including when they're black.
Well, first of all, I think what we need to mention here is this had nothing to do with race. Understand that Utahns have made a statement that they're not interested in dividing Americans based on race or gender. I wasn't elected because of the color of my skin. I wasn't elected because of my gender. I was elected because of the solutions that I put at the table.
Those were the comments of Mia Love that you earlier referenced, again saying that she wasn't elected because of her race. She claims, or she says, that she was elected because of her solutions. That brings a question when we look at the Republican Party. They feel pretty good about themselves today because they have two prominent black Republicans elected to office in Utah, in Mia Love and Tim Scott, who we'll get to in a moment, in South Carolina. What's wrong with the Mia Love candidacy and her being in office now? She has a very interesting story. Parents are from Haiti. They arrived to the United States, Brooklyn, New York, in fact, with just $10 in their pocket, and she worked hard, and she was a mayor of Saratoga Springs, Utah, for a number of years. You may recall that in 2012, she gave one of the speeches at the Republican National Convention. What's wrong with her story? Why aren't black people happy and feel just as proud about her accomplishment as they did about Barack Obama, when you consider that when she was the mayor, one of the things she ran on was personal responsibility?
Well, I don't know enough about her to give a fully informed answer, but I think that her being Haitian, I personally feel very proud about the history of Haitians and really have admiration for them historically and don't feel a disconnect. But African Americans generally don't feel a connection because we don't talk about it to Haitians. So that she's Haitian and black doesn't necessarily resonate with all African Americans.
Right, but again, what's wrong with the story? Because let me frame this correctly this time. Members of the NAACP and various prominent black politicians kind of wrote her off with her accomplishment, made no acknowledgement of it, and really kind of they weren't feeling it, to be quite honest with you. That sends a very mixed message, doesn't it?
Well, I think they weren't feeling it mostly because of the party line and the loyalty to the party, Democratic Party. And because she's not in the Democratic Party, of course they're not going to feel her. Because black people treat almost everything like church. Once we make a commitment to something, and we treat the Democratic Party like church, and she's not in the church.
Right, but it's almost cutting off your nose to spite your face. If your main concern is black people, and we talked about that just a little while ago, if your main concern is black people, then you'll work with anyone, won't you?
Well, I don't know if our main concern is black people. I wish it was. Our main concern is symbolism. For example, the symbol of Barack and Michelle was exciting to us. The symbol of Michael Brown being killed in the street was emotional to us, so we had a reaction. But Michael Brown's, Trayvon's, and et cetera are always being killed, and we don't get upset until the symbol is there. And that's why I brought up the image, because that's a symbol. So we're caught up in symbolism more than we are into practical application. Again, not because of genetics, but black people historically, when we have stepped forward and been successful and built Black Wall Street and places like Rosewood, et cetera, the trauma of how we were treated, I think, is still in our bodies and still in our ancestors' behavior that we inherited. We are apprehensive and afraid to be free thinkers. So we do symbolism and we do ritual instead of power and practice.
Well, let's just ask ourselves, if we look back over history, when the Congress was controlled by the Democrats for 40 consecutive years, if we look at the result of that control, what has happened in black America? We saw greater poverty. If we take the statistics from 1970s to the 21st century, what we see very clearly is that poverty has gone from 11% to 15%. These are classic examples that the policies of the left have not worked.
The comments, rather, from Tim Scott after he was elected in South Carolina, and you talked about symbolism. He gave an example in his soundbite: 40 years of Democratic symbolism accomplishing nothing. and he basically said that that ritual needed to stop, and that the ideas of the left just aren't working. Tim Scott is very outspoken on a lot of the things that he's expressed, and some of his ideas don't jive with the lot within the Democratic Party. Yeah, I laugh as well. However, within what he said, do you see any possibility, any room for people to flock to his ideas, black people?
Well, being black in America is a complex, nuanced phenomena. So who knows what Tim Scott's going to be able to do in this brand new position that he's in. Brand new meaning a Republican black person who was just voted into office. I agree with what he's saying, and I get my skin crawls when I think about the likes of the kind of white people that are in the Republican Party that he's now by party associated with. But my skin crawls also with how the Democratic Party puts us to sleep and continues to give us symbolic things as opposed to real things. So there's major problems on both sides. If Tim Scott winds up being something more than rhetorical and reactionary, as applies his ideas to being helpful to black people instead of avoiding the word black while in position to accommodate white folks, then who knows, maybe he'll make a difference. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, at the risk of being redundant, both parties are equally problematic.
Democrats continue to take the black vote for granted. Republicans continue to ignore that vote. So if you're African American, what do you do?
Maybe. That might be true. I mean, I think they're more intimidated, though, than uncaring. I think they're
intimidated
afraid.
by what?
I think they're afraid. I think they're afraid of black people.
Are black folks scary? Are we scary?
No. The white Republican power structure is afraid of black Americans. They don't know how to treat them. They don't know how to speak to them. They don't know anything about the culture, and they don't want to be called a racist bigot, so they stay away.
But why does that make you scared as opposed to being interested in understanding, embracing?
Because they don't want. They feel it's not worth the trouble, the few votes they might siphon off, to get involved in it. That's how they feel. I know that for a fact.
As you said in the opening tease, some sobering reality from Bill O'Reilly. What were your thoughts on that exchange between Tavis Smiley and Bill O'Reilly earlier this week?
It was fascinating to hear Bill O'Reilly, though he spoke in the third person as if he was not talking about himself, which was disingenuous and strategic. But it was interesting hearing him say straight up that white people, in this instance white Republicans, feel threatened or have fear of black people, because that's why Michael Brown and Trayvon and Sean Bell and Oscar Grant and Amadou Diallo, we can go on, that's why they're dead. So to hear him actually say that blatantly was fascinating. But of course, like I said, he said it in the third person as if he was not talking about himself.
So is this all just a game? I mean, if you said he spoke in the third person and he couldn't have that courage, I guess, that Eric Holder spoke about to have a conversation on race, he had to speak in the third person. Is this just a game, and we as black people are pawns somewhere in the middle of it?
Yeah, it's just a game. And that's why it's important that we vote and that we test this system. So if indeed we can find out through involvement that it doesn't work for us, then we can make some informed demands. But also simultaneously, we have to have enough respect for black people and ourselves to do that. The lack of accountability locally, regionally, and nationally among black people is because of our self-concept, because of our treatment in this country historically, that we have not gotten past yet on a collective basis.
Right, but haven't we gone through this long enough? I mean, even Tim Scott spoke of, and he was just talking about the Democratic Party, he gave a 40-year legacy. I guess that's a poor choice of words, but 40 years of doing nothing for black America. He spoke of that. Isn't it time that we perhaps form our own parties and align that way? Now, I say that somewhat cautiously, because there have been times when we have formed our own parties as black people, and because of lack of funds or lack of support, it did not last. Names like Rosa Clemente and Lenora Fulani come to mind right away.
Well, again, we are very caught up in symbolism. We're also very caught up in glamour and the appearance of so-called credibility. And the appearance of so-called credibility comes with commercials, money, flash, and the people that you mentioned didn't have that, along with being black people running for president. And what I mean by that is that at the time that Fulani ran, that was very pre-Obama, who was half black, and I think that's relevant symbolically. These people were looked at like they couldn't be taken seriously by black people, and even Barack Obama, up until Iowa, did not have most black people support in this country, including the Congressional Black Caucus. It was Iowa, in my opinion, white people saying it's all right to do it, black people, that we finally had the nerves to support Barack. We have issues as black people in this country because of how we've been treated and the brutality, and we have tried to cover it up with bourgeoisness, middle class aspirations, and material things instead of healing and being fully present so we can take control.
So this is not really a political journey that we need to go on. This is a healing journey that we need to embark upon. But how does that even begin?
Well, the intention behind parallel reality is to create another narrative that's going to provoke critical thinking and critical analysis and get our listeners, who will probably primarily black, to actually rethink or rebehave how we've been operating around politics in this country. Because your question was, should we do something, or is it about time we make some changes? Well, yes, it is. But as we learned when we were in Ferguson recently, where a majority black town keeps allowing a small group of white people to be voted in and running everything, which is what happens when you don't vote, we feel like we really don't have no power, and that's a delusion. We do have power. We have power. We have great power. We have several $1 trillion in our hands every year that, because of the myth of our powerlessness, trickles back out into other hands immediately, because we don't have a lot of faith in black people. And this system, I know I spoke a while here, but I'm just close with this. This system, the media, how we're educated in schools, all trains us to be white codependent instead of black independent. And that's part of why we don't vote and why we're not involved.
Well, you just referenced Ferguson, which we were recently in Ferguson, Missouri, for a documentary. But I was reading that only 40% of the black electorate in Ferguson voted. Now, I've said to you since coming back and while there in Ferguson that is a traumatized community, a community that has been re-traumatized from the burning of the memorial to seeing a dead body laying in their front yards, literally, for over 4 hours, along with the systemic institutionalized racism that they faced. Clearly, no one, in terms of politicians, stepped to the table, black or white, and said, hey, Ferguson, I know your number one concern is police brutality and getting fairness, so when you're driving while black in Ferguson, you won't feel stressed when the cop car gets behind you. Or when you're in St. Anne, Missouri, another not too far from Ferguson, you won't feel fear when you see the police as a black person driving. No one addressed those issues, clearly, because only 40% of the electorate voted. You talked about showcasing and taking in symbolism. Why couldn't even in that case, why couldn't someone just step up and say, hey, I'm the man or woman for you, Ferguson. I'm gonna see to it that police brutality gets addressed. Why wasn't that even put on the table or even talked about within the elections that were open in Ferguson, Missouri, where only 40% of the electorate voted?
Well, I'm going to attempt to be relatively brief here, because that's a very provocative question that could have me going on a tangent. But my answer to that is, first of all, bottom line is, as you mentioned, Ferguson, and we saw with our own eyes, is a deeply oppressed, traumatized community when it comes to black people. And frankly, I think most black people in this country are, and Ferguson is just a microcosm. Secondly, the white people run that city. What they're doing right now is trying to find a way to, in my opinion, to make Darren Wilson get away with murder. and they're tackling local crises, and that's what they're doing. And I think because of that, nobody stepped forward, particularly nobody black, because black folks are afraid of white people. It's often an unconscious fear that doesn't look like it's true because of our bravado, which is really a survival tactic. But black people are afraid of white people, and that's why black people waited till Iowa gave Obama approval to vote for him. We have some issues that we have not dealt with, scar tissue, that gets in the way of us taking power in this country. And that's what happened in Ferguson. We were there. I mean, I saw very little evidence of real focused, strategic, power grabbing agendas. All I saw was reaction to Darren Wilson and people wanting the local government to pay somehow. But the fight for black humanity to be valuable was not occurring.
Right, right, in Ferguson.
In Ferguson and in the United States.
Right. Well, let's look at it, though. Maybe there were some black people who were like, yo, I'm not feeling Obama, even with him and Michelle. That's nice and everything, but he not representing the issues. He's selected by those in power to do what they want him to do. The bankers come to mind. Many people felt that way.
Even if that's true, and I'm not saying it's not true, it was definitely evidence of Obama being very determined by whiteness, white power systems, and the powers that be. I mean, for example, as we already mentioned, he would not speak to the issue of race. He would not address inequality based on race. Matter of fact, he would chastise black people during his talks toward them about stepping up and taking responsibility, but not looking at social determinants. Also,
but let me ask you though. Let me just cut in for 1 second. Why is the race subject so important? I mean, if we know what white folks think about us for the most part, I'm sure there's some good meaning white folks, but if we know what they think about us for the most part, then why do we care? Why can't we just get our own house in order and then proceed? Why is it so important that we have to almost seek their approval?
You're saying, why, since we know how white people are going to be, why don't we just take our own power and do things? Well, first of all, we're not even admitting what you just said in blatant ways. We talk about racism in gossipy, backdoor ways, not unless there's a crisis. But black people don't talk about race in concrete, explicit, manageable ways. We still whisper when we say the word white while talking to each other in public.
Okay, so what, in terms, okay.
Powerful people, I'm sorry for interrupting, I just have to say this one thing. Powerful people are people who are not afraid of white folks. White gays are doing quite well. The Jewish community is doing quite well. And immigrant communities who see their numbers are doing relatively well because they're not afraid. We are afraid.
This started as a conversation about the midterm elections, and somehow, perhaps it's all related, I'm sure it is, we get into a conversation on race. A lot of people are tired of that. Black people are tired of that conversation on race. They're tired of it because, as I just said, we know the deal.
Well, that's funny.
Go ahead.
But we don't. I mean, that's ironic to me that we would be tired of a conversation we've never had, even among ourselves. Reacting to Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown and having a protest meeting, walking down the street is not engaging racism. It's reacting to racism. Even the former Attorney General said in his first words to the nation that we were cowards. And he might have been mostly talking about black folks, because when it comes to this with racism in very concrete problem-solving ways, we haven't done that. And what I mean is not dealing with racism by dealing with white people, but dealing with the impact of racism on black people and its impact on our behavior and its debilitating impact on our behavior. We ain't voting, we're not demanding excellence in our communities overall, and we're gossiping and whispering the word white.
Well, how does someone fully address racism when they are catching hell in their own community from, in some cases, their own kind, and the unemployment rates are so high, they're just finding a way to make ends meet, struggling with that. And there's all
of that is direct. Go on, I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead.
All of that you just mentioned, unemployment, fighting among each other in this country while calling each other the N-word and a black this and a black that. And every time we call ourselves an N-word and a black this and a black that and defile ourselves for being black, that is the residue of racism and whiteness in this country, because that's where those descriptors came from. Unemployment in this country among black people is based on employability. And black males in particular have the least employability in this country, not unless they actively are accommodating white people. And accommodating white people, which a lot of us do to get over, is a direct assault to black self-concept. You can't have your white racism accommodation and have your black affirming cake too. It don't work. One compromises the other. So we have to have a conversation that Jews don't have to have, and that most white people, and I mention white gays because they're white and they're a group that have made a lot of political strides, they don't have to have that conversation about being valuable or internalized oppression based on so-called race. We have a major problem. I mean, we had Raven Simone getting on TV talking about she didn't have no color and she was colorless. Only black people are tripping like that because of the unhad conversation in a practical way about racism, and that we don't know our history, and we don't know our history to accommodate white folks. If we keep on accommodating white folks, which feeds into the low self-concept and the low comparative value of black people, we're gonna stay in this position. Again, getting back to Mia Love, it's regardless of what she might do in her position, it's a contradiction to tell me that where you are has nothing to do with race, and then once you win, bring up race.
Well, why do you think she did that?
Because we are constantly in a dance as black people. We are constantly in a white accommodating dance. When you're running for a position, you say race doesn't matter so white people can accept what you're trying to do. And then once you're in, you make a temporary reference to race, and then you go on and not talk about it no more. That's what Michelle did with Obama. And that's what we do. We constantly trying to make sure that white people are with us so we don't offend them by caring about black people in blatant ways. And not caring about black people in blatant ways who have a history of social and political imbalance, which impacts self-concept, is not helpful to black people.
Well,
so people like Mia need to be strategic and do their white accommodating stuff, but they also need to remember to be there for black people too, to make up for lost time and imbalances.
Yeah, I'm not sure if she'll be able to do that in Utah. But with that said, what role does economics play into that? Because if I look at Asians, Asians are not tripping out over getting political power, but they're moving steady forward, doing what they need to do.
Yeah, that's an excellent example.
All right, right. So what role does economics play into this this equation? Because if we had some economic power, we could maybe move the meter a little bit.
But see, wait a minute now. See, you mentioned Asians, and you mentioned that they don't trip off a race and they have economic power. Well, first of all, don't talk about economic power that they have, which is a symptom of what they do have, is what preceding that, which is cultural clarity, a lack of cultural disruption, a clear, concise understanding of the importance of family, a clear, concise understanding of the importance of supporting your own. You don't got to teach them that. They don't have several trillions of dollars leaving their community every year. We do, because we don't have that cultural connection. It was disrupted by slavery and internalized oppression.
But wait a second.
That's why I keep saying that if we address that issue and resolve that, we will get economic power.
But wait a second. I could just hear the listeners now saying, oh, now we're talking about slavery. That was so many years ago. Is there any way to change that narrative, or how important is that really?
Those black people who say that are part of the problem. They're part of the problem. Jews always making films about the Holocaust. It's over too. The Holocaust is over. Every year, several films, several books, several videos come out about the Holocaust, and their mantra is never again. And they're doing very well, and they still say never again. And they still constantly putting a swastika and a skeletal remains of a Jew in your face every year. So anybody black who says that's in the past is a white accommodationist. We are trained as a result of slavery by default to be white accommodationists, and almost everything we say and all of our impulses go back into short-circuiting ourselves, and going right into being a white accommodationer again. Slavery is relevant. This brilliant brother named Tanishi Coates did a brilliant piece in the Atlantic on reparations, and it was brilliant and concise and comprehensive. And because we're trained like a dog to be white accommodations, we ignored that beautiful article that was on the cover page of the Atlantic.
Well, what would you have liked to have seen from that report?
I would have liked to. I would like there to have been a conversational revolution in our communities about this brother's work, about all that he compiled, and how he created a bulletproof argument on why we should have what the Native Americans are getting, what some Jewish groups are getting, what some Eskimos are getting. We should be getting some level of reparations as well. You couldn't argue with him. But we are afraid of offending white folks, so we don't address things that are important to us.
Here's another question that comes to mind. The Obama second term and his presidency is almost up, and many view it now as perhaps a lame duck presidency. How do you view, or how will you view the Obama presidency, the 8 years he was in office?
I will view Obama's presidency as basically I always have. It was a social experiment. Somebody wanted to get the right kind of black person in that position to test to see what's going to happen and to reduce anxiety among black people about there being racism so we can say there's no racism. And it worked from the very beginning in terms of the immediate thing that happened on day 2 after he got in office was people hollering that we were in post-racial America. So it worked. It's so easy to play us because we're so busy avoiding things, we stay disoriented. So somebody said we would live in a post-racial America. We fed that crap to our kids or did not defy that message. And now they think they live in post-racial America. And things are just as bad as they ever were, if not worse, since Obama's been president. He never spoke to us in direct ways on a national level. So I think he was a social experiment.
Okay, so it sounds as if you're saying a game has been played. A game is still being played on us. With that in mind, we'll take
absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. And with that in mind, we'll take a short break and we'll talk about another issue where someone controlled the discussion, so to speak. A videotape surfaced about a week ago, and someone kind of skewed it to suit their own narrative. We'll get to that, but first, you're listening to the Parallel Realities Podcast. I referenced before the musical interlude there that a videotape surfaced last week where a white woman in New York City went walking about town, various places. I even noticed sites in Harlem that I'm aware of that she walked about, and she received quite a bit of attention from many male admirers. Some just saying hello and you look nice, and some being outright vulgar and saying things that were not nice. And some even following and wanting to walk with her. But the key thing in that, which didn't really become known until a couple of days after the release, was that the firm that did this videotape did not include the comments from the white men who had had things to say to this woman. So all we got to see were comments from black and brown men, lustful comments from some black and brown men in that regard. And you know, it just seems that all of this is not a mistake. It's by some grand design, or it's someone's pathology that they've not come to terms with, that these things are done and they're presented as if that's how the world is. And we just finished talking about politics a while ago. And again, politics, some call it politricks, where there are games being played. And somewhere in the middle of that is the black reality. But somewhere in the middle of that black reality that some portray is a slanting or a skewing or not even a mentioning of the reality. So what were your thoughts on that whole videotape and the subsequent truth about the videotape?
Well, frankly, I figured that had occurred. I don't trust the media, and I can be very concrete why. It's not just some kind of paranoid fantasy. There's some absolute reasons why I don't trust the media. But that's another moment. But when I saw it, I thought to myself, where the white dudes at? Where's their perspective? I'm sure they had something to say as well, and that they commented as well. So I suspected that. So I had no reaction except for relief when it came to the surface that the white men were edited out. White folks and black people who are professional accommodators will call that paranoid. I call it healthy to have a healthy critique and an analysis of this is likely slanted. And we need to not care about some white woman walking down the street in her video. So what? We need to be making other things important. We need to be making our children and each other critical thinking and focused on black success, excellence, and power. Damn, a video with some white woman walking down the street. So what?
Okay, but for the purposes of this discussion and for the purposes really of this program, we're going to talk about black people. So in that regard, I'm sure you have, and I know I have, witnessed black men addressing black women walking down the street with more than just a hello and sometimes forms of vulgarity. So as a result of that, what can be learned from this videotape and put a black spin on it in that regard in terms of addressing each other? If a brother sees a sister that he finds attractive, some brothers may not think that saying hello or good morning is going to get her attention. And now again, as I said just a little while ago, I've witnessed it when they've said much more than just hello, and they've been quite loud and ostentatious and gaudy about it. So in view of that, in terms of us, again, we spent a good part of this first program talking about us healing and us I guess the inference was us addressing each other in a way that was powerful. So in that respect, what can be done? And again, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm out of lane here, talking about instances where brothers and sisters have not addressed each other respectfully. So what can be done in that regard?
Everything is connected. What kind of threw me off about your question was that we're using this racist white woman's video as a frame of reference, and I said, and I can't do that. That was a racist video, and I suspected it was racist and wanted to paint a certain picture of black men and Latino men. But getting back to your question, which I think is separate from that video, you and I spoke recently about how we could walk down the street, and I know I do it every day here in Washington, D.C., and see black people every day, and literally avoid contact, literally actively not look at each other, literally actively not speak to each other when each other walk past each other. We got some issues that are festering because of the lack of intervention on our mental state. So it goes back to what I said earlier in terms of your question regarding black male and female interaction, which is similar to black male and male reaction in terms of not really being openly positive with each other, but almost defensive or dismissive. We got some issues to deal with as a people, because not dealing with the stuff I already talked about, the behavioral mental health issues, is festering and getting worse. When I was younger, which wasn't in the 19th century, it was relatively recently, we used to speak. Just like we used to have our own businesses, and we used to have our own communities, and we used to be much more self-contained, and our money did not change hands so quickly, leaving the community. The post-racial myth, because we're tired of dealing with race issues, is causing us to not deal with race phenomena and not care about each other, and it's having a negative impact. So that impacts male and female relationships too. Getting back to your question, right. Male and female interaction, and the patriarchal tendencies to dehumanize women or make them sexual objects. A lack of healthiness deteriorates into more unhealthiness.
How do we make space for those real conversations? Because I don't think, I mean, even if you do get that greeting, smiling face from someone, from everyone, when you walk outside your door in black communities, I don't think everyone's going to just say, hey, man, and have a 25-minute to an hour monologue on what's going on and with their lives. People are moving, people are flowing, especially in big cities. How do you make space for, okay, Jerome over here is hurting. Although we see him every day, Jerome ain't feeling too good. How can the community embrace Jerome so Jerome can feel whole or healed?
Well, first of all, we have to start thinking logically, and not in these disoriented splatters. And what I mean by that, and I'm not trying to offend, but I'm just trying to make a point here. You said, well, even if we start talking to each other and being nice to each other, that might not necessarily result in the structural change that's necessary. And I'm telling you that it does. It's all relevant. Talking with each other, speaking with each other, is not just surface. It's behavioral. See, right now we live in a society where we're reacting to symbols and reality TV and superficial crap, which has no impact on our behavior locally. It's just another distraction. If our behavior locally was more respectful and we were speaking with each other like we did back in the day when we had neighborhoods and communities, we would operate better like we used to. So speaking with each other is not just surface, it's behavioral, and it trickles down into the community's personality and how we see and deal with each other, how we care about each other. More and more, we don't care about each other, and that we don't speak to each other is part and parcel of that not caring. So I have to talk about this methodologically and logically before I go into some confusing theory here. Part of what we have to do, which includes how we interact with each other, is learn to unlearn the stuff that has us not speaking with each other now. And that has to do with one of the only thing that I can think of that makes that piece relevant with that white woman walking down the street is that and you already mentioned this, is that it taking the white boys out re-emphasized the myth that black men and Latino men, but I only care more about the black men to be honest, are problematic people, are particularly bad, are particularly animalistic, are particularly objectifying, are the ones who are, in particular have behavior problems. When indeed, white folks do the same thing. But the message that's perpetual, that does affect us, which that video did too, was that there's something wrong with being black. We need to leave this alone and go be white.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Right. There are also
that's what we're doing, and that's what's hurting us.
Yeah, there are also a lot of trappings that get in the way in terms of us really dealing. I mean, because when you look someone in the eye, you're looking at them and talking to them. You know, there's a connection there. But I think there are a lot of trappings that get in the way, such as sneakers, clothes you wear, how you wear your hair, things like that are just non-issues. But how and please correct me if I'm wrong if those are not part of the experience. How do we avoid from dealing with all that stuff that's unnecessary?
There's a book, and I think his name is Tom Burrell, called Brainwashed. That, what you just got finished talking about in terms of hair and sneakers and stuff, he talks about that we are targeted by the media to be so superficial and so caught up in symbolism and material things. Our communities are deprived and demoralized, so we, to anesthetize ourselves in the midst of demoralization, get caught up in shiny things, in new things that make white folks or non-black folks money. It's a vicious cycle that we are purposely targeted to perpetuate. So none of this stuff is just independent black behavior. It's coerced and conditioned by larger forces. And we're so busy accommodating white folks, we don't set our children down and prepare them to be critical thinking young people and adults where they can see that stuff before it comes. Because see, you don't got Asians in droves doing this stuff. You don't got other communities who are not as traumatized by racism or who have more cultural clarity in their last names organically doing this stuff. It's only us. And it all can be fixed because it's all based on mindsets, not physical state, but mindset. So we can all snap out of this white supremacy trance and start having behavioral excellence. But the behavioral excellence conversation has to be a priority conversation, which means we have to stop accommodating white folks.
Okay, last question on this topic, and we'll wrap up afterwards. Okay, what if a brother's walking down the street and he sees a sister that he thinks is attractive, and he'd like to get to know her? If he says hello and there's no response or whatever, what would be right behavior in terms of that dynamic?
Well, I have to talk about what not to do before I talk about what to do.
Well, I think we know what not to do. It's clear.
No, it ain't clear. It might be clear to you, but it ain't clear to everybody. I mean, one thing the video showed was people doing what not to do. It didn't show the white boys doing what not to do, but it showed black men doing what not to do.
Right.
You don't dehumanize women. You don't catcall women, and you don't do it to men either. You don't treat them like pieces of flesh that you have the right to constantly critique and objectify. You don't do that. You don't look at women as pieces of meat for you to pursue. And women shouldn't look at men that way either. It's all right to find somebody attractive and beautiful and even sexy, but they're still a human being, and we should humanize people as well and not do, the objectification stuff. So that has to be reiterated first, because what not to do is that. And what not to do is something to do. To do not doing. If you understand what I mean.
Sure.
Secondly, not unless you know somebody, say nice, how you doing? I really admire your beauty, and go about your business if you want to do that.